Last night, I was standing in Budapest when 16 years of authoritarian rule came to an end. And I want to tell you why this matters, not just for Hungary, but for the entire world. To understand why hundreds of thousands of people poured into the streets this weekend, you need to understand who Viktor Orbán is and what he represents. Orbán first came to power in 1998, but his return in 2010 is what changed everything. Over the next 16 years, he systematically dismantled Hungary's democratic institutions, the courts, the press, the electoral system, all while technically following the rules. He called it, in his own words, an illiberal state. But here's why Orbán matters beyond Hungary. He was actually the blueprint. Before Trump and the others, Orbán showed the global far right exactly how to dismantle democracy from the inside, using elections, controlling the media, rewriting the constitution, and gerrymandering the map. Trump and MAGA didn't invent this playbook. They imported it from Budapest. So, who is the man who brought down Orbán and how did he do it? Péter Magyar, whose last name literally means Hungarian, grew up in Budapest, and as a child he had a photograph of a popular politician pinned to his bedroom wall, a photo of Viktor Orbán. Because back then, in 1989, Orbán was a hero, a young lawyer who had stood up in public and demanded that the Soviet troops leave Hungary, around the collapse of the Iron Curtain. Magyar was 9 years old at the time and was completely mesmerized. Decades later, he joined Orbán's Fidesz party and rose through its ranks. And then, in early 2024, everything changed. A scandal broke out when Hungary's president, a close friend of Orbán, had quietly pardoned a man convicted of covering up the sexual abuse of children at a state care home. This tore down the perception that many Hungarians held of Orbán's government as the defender of Christian and family values. In an explosive interview, Magyar accused Orbán and his allies of corruption, of hiding behind the scandal, and laid out what he'd seen from the inside, including his famous statement that a few families own half the country. And just like that, an unknown lawyer had broken away from Orbán's far-right party and became the most important opposition figure in Hungary overnight, promising an end to corruption and focusing on helping working-class people and affordability. Magyar built his campaign entirely through social media and grassroots organizing. He walked across Hungary with supporters and went from total obscurity to being the favored candidate for prime minister in less than 2 years. As an American, it was also interesting that just days before the election, JD Vance flew to Budapest to stand on stage with Orbán. Trump himself had promised to bring American economic might to Hungary if Fidesz won. They needed Orbán to survive, because Orbán was their proof of concept. He was the model that they followed. So, if Budapest rejected that model, it wouldn't just be about Hungarian politics. It would be a strong message to every movement that has been taking notes from Orbán's playbook. But let me take you back to Friday night, because before the election, something happened that told me everything I needed to know about where this was heading. Heroes Square, Hungary's most sacred public space, was built in 1896 to celebrate 1,000 years of Hungarian civilization, with statues of the 7 tribal leaders who founded the Hungarian nation. And on Friday night, over 100,000 people filled it, and also the streets spilling out from it in every direction, for a 7-hour concert they called the System-Breaking Concert. Over 50 Hungarian artists performed, and every single one of them was a musician who used their platform to speak out against the regime. The crowd was also surprisingly diverse. There were obviously a lot of young people, which is interesting because there is an entire generation that has grown up knowing nothing but Fidesz. But there were also a lot of older people and people from all backgrounds, from rockers and hipsters to skaters and artists. One of the performers, Benedikt Szabo, summed it up when he said, "Everyone's fed up, and everyone's ready to finally change this system. We've had enough." Standing in that square, surrounded by over 100,000 people, and seeing all of them lift their lights up full of hope is something that's hard to put into words. Plus, I got a fun Vote for Tisa sticker. Then came election day. As I went to explore the Citadella with my Dutch friend Jogit, Hungarians were hitting the polls at a record-breaking pace, with voter turnout hitting nearly 80%, the highest since free elections began in Hungary. People knew what was at stake, and they showed up. Fortunately, I had to work that evening at the hostel, making beds and doing laundry, but I was able to leave a little bit early to experience arguably the most historic day for Hungary in recent history. I headed to the metro, where I found more people than I've ever seen on the Budapest metro. As we squeezed in, people were already celebrating, shouting anti-government and anti-Russian slogans. At every stop, more and more people squished onto the metro, so much so that people stopped trying to get on the metro and just started recording us instead. But I finally made it. People were hugging and shaking hands with random strangers all around the city. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people gathered along the Danube across from the Parliament building. I was able to find some of my friends in the madness, including my friend Nick, who ripped his pants climbing on top of the metro station with us. I've never felt anything like that before. And I even learned some new political chants in Hungarian. Hungary's oldest football chant, which is over a century old. Literally, Russians go home. These words were first chanted during the 1956 Hungarian Revolution, when Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest and ordinary Hungarians fought back with their bare hands. That revolution was crushed, but the chant survived. And here it was again in 2026, aimed at a prime minister who had spent years cozying up to Putin. 16 years of frustration and corruption, cronyism and captured institutions compressed into 2 words. This one is beautiful. The Tisza is one of Hungary's great rivers, and also the name of Péter Magyar's new party. The Tisza is rising, the flood is coming. And finally, Europa, showing solidarity with the EU and NATO, and specifically Ukraine, as Orbán had blocked aid to Ukraine in support of Putin.
Szeretnék köszönetet mondani.
Magyar's new Tisza party ended up winning 138 seats out of 199 in parliament, 53.6% of the vote. And honestly, I was pretty surprised, but Orbán called Magyar personally to concede. Magyar spoke to everyone gathered along the Danube. Tonight, truth prevailed over lies.
Közösen leváltottuk az Orbán rendszert, közösen felszabadítottuk Magyarországot, visszavettük a hazánkat.
And after the Hungarian national anthem, and also some fireworks, the crowd quickly descended into a crazy party. And here's what makes this election extra interesting. All 199 seats in parliament were up for election, and winning a 2/3 supermajority allows the prime minister to literally rewrite the constitution, which is why just winning the election wasn't enough. Because Orbán didn't just win elections. He used his own supermajority to rewrite the rules of the game. He weakened the courts, controlled the media, and packed the judiciary with loyalists. In 2011, he passed a whole new constitution called the Fundamental Law, which locked much of this in place. With his new supermajority, Magyar can now undo all of it and the rigged constitution itself. Though it's worth being honest here. Having the tools isn't the same as the job being done. The real test now is whether this majority gets used to genuinely rebuild Hungarian democracy, or just to swap out who holds the levers. But for the first time in 16 years, there is a lot of hope in Hungary. I've traveled a lot. I've been to festivals, protests, matches, celebrations of all kind, and I have never experienced anything quite like Sunday night in Budapest. People were congratulating each other on the metro, complete strangers, hugging and high-fiving. On the streets, people were honking at each other, waving Hungarian flags, and the chants kept breaking out spontaneously, on corners, in squares, echoing down alleyways. This citywide solidarity, people smiling at each other in the streets and just knowing that they were sharing the same moment, I've never felt anything quite like it.
Insane.
In 2023, Poland's Law and Justice Party, another Orbán-style nationalist government, was voted out after 8 years. Now Hungary. The dominoes are moving, and Trump could be next. But more than any of that, what gives me hope is simpler. Orbán rigged the system. He controlled the media, drew the maps, rewrote the constitution. He did everything by the authoritarian playbook, and people still found a way. They organized, they unified, they showed up in record numbers, and they won. Authoritarianism does not have to be permanent. It can be defeated when normal people mobilize, even when it rigs the game, and that's what Budapest proved this weekend. Some moments and some feelings are impossible to describe. This was one of them. So, if this video meant something to you, please share it, because this story deserves to be heard beyond Hungary. And if you want to understand more about traveling, politics, and learning languages, then feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.